Endeavours of Sherlock Holmes, The Mystery of the Mendicant Society, is copyright 2014 by its author, Sandor Jay Sonnen. All rights reserved. Endeavours of Sherlock Holmes. 2. The Mystery of the Mendicant Society by Sandor Jay Sonnen. The heart of spring this year brings with it a deep rush of patriotism throughout the land. Passing my countrymen on the streets or in the parks finds me returning smiles from strangers of every station, as news from Pretoria makes its way to every corner of London and all of Britain. As if a pall has been lifted throughout the land since the death of General Gordon, what is being hailed in the press as the Peace of Vereeniging is lifting the spirits of the Empire. The terms are more than so many of us had expected, that the Boers have surrendered and all parties must swear allegiance to the Crown has warmed the hearts of every person one meets at common points. Sherlock Holmes appeared to be without his own celebration of joy on this day. My friend was never one to use words unnecessarily in the area of national pride. Though he worked on more than one occasion for the interests of Great Britain, his feelings of service and achievement were kept within his soul and not squandered on flabby sentiment. I had seen the battlefield and never pretended war was either desired or of a benefit to the human condition. Its occasional necessity brought with it, for me, a hope for speedy conclusion and the return of our soldiers in fine condition. I had sent Holmes a message asking him to meet me for dinner, and he had accepted. We met near the British Museum, walked down Gower Street, and we soon found ourselves having dinner at a restaurant Holmes enjoyed for its lamb cutlets. We had heard during our brief walk music from the nearby college, and Holmes remarked it was the Academic Festival Overture, presumably being practiced for the upcoming culmination. This led to Holmes taking some time to discuss his appreciation of Johannes Brahms, the man's violin concerto and symphonies, and his rooting his romanticism in musical structure of classical design. Brahms' music is very new, and this overture isn't yet 10 years old, but it is making its way around the campuses due to its title, and that Brahms wrote it as an appreciation for being given an honorary doctorate from a university in his native land. But there's a joke built into this work you are listening to presently. Brahms was needled by the college that had gifted him the honorary doctorate to write them a grand work, and in doing so one of the administrators gave what seemed to Brahms to be too much direction in what this scholar hoped the piece would be. So the composer used, in the basis of this festival overture, several German drinking songs of renown, popular with campus life in their public houses. I suppose, I remarked, that only made the orchestral work more enjoyable for the students. Just so, Holmes gave a wry grin. Artists with a wit, and young men sent away for some years to study, can find themselves with a similar humour. And his violin concerto has controversy, though for a purist like myself, Brahms is certainly a gift for our age. All of the emotion the public demands in romanticism, wrapped in a deep appreciation of classical structure. You will not find another such as him for a long while. I don't believe the musical world truly understands what he's driving at, but recently his F major symphony has received high praise. I enjoyed everything about the early evening. We had a table by the window, and I watched as the darkness brought a wonderful night sky to an evening without fog, and touches of gaslighting on the street lit up all who were taking a late stroll. When it was my turn to contribute to our conversation, I flatly asked him whether he would keep a promise he made to me some years earlier. You told me, Holmes, that when the plots of Baron Maupertuis were long behind us, and that in no way could he ever again work his mischief, I would have permission to report to the public of your involvement in the Netherlands-Sumatra matter. Holmes gave a bark of laughter at this. Well, Watson, you really didn't need to stuff me like a goose before dropping this on me. Truly, am I that difficult to approach? I must admit that the news from South Africa was also on my mind when I sent you today's invitation. Holmes was bland and gave no immediate response. You have to appreciate the feelings of the collective community that is our kingdom, I prodded him. It hasn't escaped your observations that our countrymen are enjoying a moment of good cheer today. Not at all, said Holmes, relenting a smile. but I have been bored lately, and my lack of real work has made me feel some doldrums. I apologize if I haven't yet entered into the mood of the peace treaty. But to the instant matter that is your question, I suppose I have to agree with you that news from Pretoria means a definite end to any further machinations by our friend the Baron. I capitulate to your request. The British people deserve to read the entire event, I said firmly. Well, the publication of it will certainly bring at the least a few stern telegrams from various government departments. On that basis alone, it's worth putting before the public. Holmes gave a crafty expression. With Holmes's allowance to place into print the amazing escapades of one of Europe's most notorious villains, we find ourselves in the familiar setting of the Baker Street lodging during February 1887, where Holmes had received some time before 10 on this day an unsigned telegram, asking he make himself available at 3 that afternoon. Being given notice of the meeting meant I could arrange matters at my home and practice, so I was able to go missing. Gone missing being my wife's expression for my occasional and sometimes immediate work with Holmes. It was under this circumstance that we found ourselves visited by Professor Ellis Ducaney. His card had preceded him by 5 minutes, thanks to Mrs. Hudson, while he took off his hat and coat at the foot of the stairs. His name was known to a great many in London, and even I had heard of the Professor from newspaper reports. Upon receiving his card from Mrs. Hudson, I mentioned to Holmes how the Times reported he was working with Wyke Bayliss to have the Society of British Artists be recognised as a royal charter. Though Holmes had no interest in the inner politics of art societies or anything similar, he did follow matters of art, not merely for art's sake, of which he could occasionally show some appreciation, but for what it meant to gather large and valuable collections in one place at one time. I mentioned to him that there had been much talk and newsprint about Bayliss and Whistler, and of the direction the Society would take in the desire to have new exhibitions in London. "You are following the arts?" Holmes asked of me, and I wasn't certain whether he was making a jest or if he was genuinely surprised I would know about the Professor. He lectures at the university where I studied medicine. As this was mentioned in one of the news stories about the matter of the Royal Charter, I remembered it the way anyone does of stories where their alma mater is featured. We heard through the open door the footsteps of our guest, climbing with some care the stairs to the B apartment. Professor Ducaney walked into the sitting room and was immediately given a chair beside the fire. He bent his portly frame toward it, warmed his hands, and turned to Holmes to speak in quiet tones. "Thank you, Mr. Holmes, for being here at the time I asked for, and not minding that the telegram went unsigned," he said, with a nod of his head. "It is something of a personal matter, but it would in fact become official if needs be. Though the reason I am here is to prevent it from becoming official," the Professor said, placing special emphasis on the word not. "May I know this gentleman?" Professor Ducaney asked, seeing that I wasn't leaving, but instead, like he and Holmes, was taking a chair near the fire. "This is my associate, Dr. John Watson," Holmes said as an introduction. "Dr. Watson, who, by the way, was a medical student at your university, is privy to all of the work I do, and he on occasion participates in my investigations." "Yes, very good. I can only pray this investigation will be one that bears fruit and in quick fashion. May I state my problem to you, Mr. Holmes?" The Professor looked at us both. "Please do so," Holmes replied. After a brief moment of thought, Professor Ducaney began. "I believe I have been the subject of a scheme where I have been duped into giving up a valuable painting that had been placed into my custody through the Society of British Artists, for which, outside of my capacity as an art lecturer at the University of London, I receive commissions to examine works of art and give my expert view about their authenticity. As an aside, I do not hide my interest in being given more work of this kind from the Society, and any scandal would end such hopes that I may have in this direction." He waited for some kind of response, and when it was not forthcoming, he continued, "I am not at liberty to say the name of the artist whose work is in question, as it has not yet been authenticated, but I can give you particulars of the theft." Once again he looked to Holmes. "Please proceed, Professor. You're doing quite well." Holmes prodded. Holmes probably hoped each of his sentences would not end with the professor's expectation of some kind of reaction. "The small room I use for an office is toward the rear of the lecture hall I have been assigned to by the college. The room is where I have my desk and where I read the essays of my students or critique their art assignments. I have placed there some easels I use to prop up paintings, allowing me to view them from my desk. They often stay up there for several days until each of them in turn is returned to the student artist with my notes. I had placed on one of the easels this work entrusted to me by the society, and like the others, it was covered when I was not reviewing it, and it was covered all day yesterday. I was working there last night, well after the university's last class would have concluded. It was sometime just after 7, and though I was probably not completely alone in the building or alone on the campus as a whole, it was very quiet in the area that is my haunt, so to speak. In the middle of my quiet work I heard a noise of some kind, and I eventually found myself bothered by a continuous rattling and its echo. This noise seemed to come from a series of pipes that traverse the wall of my office from ground to ceiling, which is part of the heating system of the university. The noise was not a loud one, but it did become so continuous and disruptive that I left my office and went upstairs to the floor above in an attempt to trace its source. I walked into a secondary hall off of the main one and began guessing at what room would be the one above mine. It did not take me long, for it could only have been one of a few choices before me. Soon I found an unlocked door, where upon opening it I could hear the same rattling sound, and after I called out and received no response, I entered what was an office with 2 desks and followed into another room just beyond it, and found the room where the noise had its origin. At once I discovered a hammer hanging by a cord which had been positioned next to an open window where the night breeze was causing the hammer to dance upon the pipe. And here was the culprit of my bothers. Naturally, I did not think at that moment there was a relationship between the fixing of the hammer and the intent to have me leave my office for a period of time. I simply thought there was some reason for the hammer's being there that I could not fathom. I took hold of the hammer and cord and wrapped it over one of the window's clasps so the hammer would still be at hand for whoever placed it there, and in doing so, I prevented the hammer from hitting the pipe and interfering with me as I continued my work. The moment our guest mentioned the part about the dangling hammer, Holmes had become interested. His keen eyes brightened and his seated posture markedly changed. He had stopped puffing his pipe and rested it in the bowl of his cupped palms. In his chair he rocked forward and backward slightly, as a smile began to curl at his lips. I walked back down the flight of stairs nearest my office, re-entered it, and as I made my way around the desk to my chair to continue reading from a stack of essays, I noticed something was wrong in the sag of the cover on the easel that was holding up the painting of which I speak. The shape of the cloth covering was not the true rectangular shape that was formed by a squared canvas. It was bowed and untidy. I undraped the cover, and there was the easel itself, but with no painting on it. Well, sir, I looked all over the office, but my heart began to sink, as I realized doing so was a futile gesture. The painting was not to be found. Though I knew it was not at my home, I checked there anyway. Then I spent this morning rechecking my office and the lecture hall, but to no avail. After doing this, I sent you my telegram. Holmes spoke for the first time. Is it possible it was taken before last night, and you only just discovered it was missing at that moment? No, Mr. Holmes. I knew all of these checks were unnecessary, and that the work was stolen at that moment in my office when I first uncovered the empty easel, and I'll tell you why that is the case. That particular painting was on an easel, which is most immediate to my desk. Every time I walked around to my desk to be seated, and every time I did the reverse, I had to move my body in such a way to not upset the painting and easel. When I left to find the source of the noise, I made the same movement to skirt the painting which I had made for days now, as it had become a near reflex to me. I most certainly moved around the easel with the painting beneath it when I left my office to go upstairs. Should the easel have had the drooped appearance at that moment, I would have lifted the cover then and there. At any rate, that is how my mind has ordered the event. Holmes replaced his pipe in his mouth, smoked some, and looked up at the ceiling. That does seem straightforward, Holmes stated, but it does raise a particular point of why someone should choose yesterday evening to visit your university, arrange the subterfuge of the hammer, watch as you left your office for the brief moment as they presumed you would, and slip in to take the painting. Such an individual would have to know of your being charged with authenticating the painting, know you would keep it in your office during your professional examination of it, know more or less where in your office it would be, and know they could effect its theft in only a specific, brief few minutes. To your knowledge, did anyone know you had the painting in your office? Professor Ducani was emphatic. That is the amazing part of all of this, Mr. Holmes. I do not brag about my work of this kind. I do not speak of my using my office to examine works entrusted to me. I do not mention to a soul about my involvement in the process of authentication for the society. And when my work of this kind is completed, and it is announced there is a new find that has been proven, I take a back seat to James Whistler and his more lettered professionals. A work is brought to me at the earlier stages of the authentication process, and only when it involves a new find. Many times, some of the more important professionals of the society are circumspect about a piece that was done in a style that is still classified as too unique to be counted as important, or... Professor Ducani seemed embarrassed and searched for a phrase. Within the accepted style of the more conservative elements of the British art world. You're speaking in euphemism, Professor, Holmes offered. You're of course referring to the schools like those of Impressionism and Aestheticism, schools where the works have themes or styles which are currently in controversy. Have no fear on that score, Professor. You are in good hands here. I make no judgments of the kind your society must be ripe with, as it decides what to show and endorse and what to censure. You have the point exactly, Mr. Holmes, and though this is a by the way, I am aligned with those who support new art being shown by the society. Yes, said Holmes, but if you originally believed no one really knew of your movements in relation to your semi-secret society work, you have now formed an opposite view. Yes, Mr. Holmes, but how did you presume that? I know this is the case, for there is one piece of information which you have withheld. Something happened last night before you heard the hammer tap on the pipe. Yes, Mr. Holmes, and I had no intention of leaving it out, but I do not see how you knew about this. Pray continue, Holmes said. Well, yes, Mr. Holmes. A man opened the door from the lecture hall to my office and spoke to me that tomorrow night, meaning this evening, the floors of the hall would be washed, and did I want my office washed as well? I replied to him that I would. I made a mental note to make arrangements to safeguard certain things in the office before strangers entered and worked there, and that I would make these preparations after my 2 o'clock lecture the following day, which would mean today. But now I am of the mind that I was talking to the thief, who, though he never truly entered my office, could see the easels from the other side of the door as long as it was open enough, and of course it was. What is the subject of the painting? I found myself speaking for the first time. Whether this was helpful to Holmes, I couldn't say. But I had to admit to a base interest in the work itself. It is a 24 by 36 portrait, oil on canvas, of Artemis and Actaeon, a famous theme in Greek mythology that has been painted many times. Artemis, who is Diana in the Roman pantheon, is goddess of the hunt and of the moon. While many of the gods and goddesses were not exactly modest, Artemis was known for her privacy and had a sacred place where she bathed nearby her temple. While she was there, she discovered the famed and heroic hunter, Actaeon, was spying on her while she was naked. She punished him by turning him into a stag, and afterward she set his dogs upon him, and he was devoured by them. There are other versions of this same theme with different endings, but this is probably the most popular. But to talk about the painting itself, its wonderful use of colour and its primitive approach to the setting is unique. The look of the subject places her apart from how she is portrayed in other works presenting the same event. Artemis is depicted as a sunburnt pagan goddess living in the wild, and not the impossibly white and perfectly designed woman of classical beauty, set in neatly organised hedges in forested lands just outside of Athens, which was how so many other artists, especially those of the Renaissance, treated the subject. When you were given this commission, Professor, how did it come about? Who specifically gave it to you, and how did you receive the painting? Holmes asked. This was in no way different than 2 other assignments I had been given previously. I was told privately at a meeting of the society, after the formal meeting ended, that I was to have the job. Mr. Bayliss described to me the commission and said that the painting would be sent by messenger to my lecture hall, where I would have to sign for it, It happened exactly that way in all 3 instances, this being the 3rd. One of the advantages of my keeping my assignment works with the student ones is that I believed no thief would ever take any interest in my students' classwork, and that such a person would presume any work in my office to be a student assignment. It is a perfect camouflage. Yes, I agree, remarked Holmes. Your idea of security was imaginative, and frankly, the very best one might design. It's so basic and random that it precludes a man who might use burglar-proof devices, security keys and the like, and therefore we are left to ponder how such secret knowledge of the painting being at your room became known to other persons. I will take up your case, Professor. This matter of the method of discovery is an interesting point of which I am curious, and only by working the case can I have its answer. Listening to Holmes make this comment and seeing these words had no effect upon our visitor, I thought for a moment about my friend's own version of art for art's sake. Should Professor Ducaney's problem not have had a factor my friend would have found interesting, he may have politely rejected helping the man in his hour of need. Holmes stood, and Professor Ducaney did likewise. I would prefer to call upon you in your office tomorrow. Dr. Watson and I will be discreet, but visit your office we must, and we can't come today as the floors are being washed. Holmes smiled. I wish I could find some humour in your jest, Mr. Holmes, but my wits will not allow for it. Keep up your spirits. The matter is serious and will not be answered easily. But there are some ways on which we might act. Holmes was reassuring. We said good afternoon to our troubled academic, and Holmes refilled the cherry wood pipe he had been enjoying with tobacco from the slipper on the mantel. I filled mine as well with the tobacco Holmes kept for those times I visited him. I watched Holmes as he sat by the fire in deep thought for a long while. You do see my interest in Ducaney's problem, Watson? No, said I. Think about it. Holmes leaned forward and stirred the fire. What do we know about the thief and the decisions he made to obtain the painting? His plan was to steal a painting, and he succeeded, I answered. I continued. He designed a solid way to do it, got Professor Ducaney out of his office for 5 minutes, ran down what I would guess to be the stairs at the opposite end of the building, made his way to Ducaney's office, grabbed the painting and left through a door he thought to be the furthest from where the professor would eventually return to on the floor below. "Ha!" exclaimed Holmes. "Everything rings true in your theory, but one word. Being." "Plan?" Holmes said plainly. "I do not see a plan. In fact, everything the thief did shows him to be bold and resourceful, and able to work out the taking of the painting without any plan whatsoever. How do you reason that was the case? He walked in on the professor. Well, he opened the door to his office, verified the painting was on the easel." "Did he?" interrupted Holmes. "Very well, then." I understood Holmes was making a point. He discovered there were easels with artworks under covers. I corrected myself. Holmes nodded kindly. He alighted to the story above Ducaney's lecture hall, fixed the hammer, then went downstairs and waited in a place where he could observe the main door to the lecture hall, positioning himself in such a way so Ducaney wouldn't see him when he left to go upstairs to the next floor. "The rest we know," I finished. "And," Holmes said, "he did all of that without a dummy painting." "I fail to follow you," I said. "Oh, come now, Watson. This is my point. We have before us a criminal arriving to the university without a plan and acting with improvised tools. Unless it is your view he arrived with a hammer and cord, but not with something that would take the place of the genuine painting, knowing it to be undercover. Our thief must have had some rudimentary notion that the painting was there, but he had to have made this discovery, or the idea of stealing it, at that moment while he was on the university's premises, or just outside when he arrived. Our man, for reasons unknown, found his chance and acted on it straight away. He arrived without another canvas to put under the cover and in place of the Artemis painting, which if he would have done so, he might have bought himself another 12 to 20 hours before the good professor would have discovered of the loss of the painting. This was action on the fly. This general idea made, Holmes tightly pulled a blanket around himself, closed his eyes, and said no more about the matter the rest of the day, but finished his smoke in silence. I left my friend with his private thoughts on the problem brought to him from Professor Ducaney, returning to my home to enjoy supper and the company of my wife. The next day I broke fast and saw several clients with one break in between, and left my practice at 2:30. I returned to Baker Street using the Underground and found Holmes ready for our trip to the college, and downstairs we went to hail a cab. We found very close to the door of the lodgings that opened onto the street a young couple who I thought to be man and wife. They stood by the cab's door and bowed. Holmes fished in his pocket for threepence, gave it to the man, who said not a word, but bowed and quickly stowed the coin away. "Holmes," I said as the horse built up speed, "did you see the bows that man and women were wearing on their lapels? Well, on the area of what served for lapels, had their homely clothes allowed for such?" "Yes, I've seen that device for some time. There are seemingly hundreds of these mendicants throughout London. The weather makes us more charitable than usual." "I think they're a bit bold, wearing the national colours as if they're some organised group," said I. "They are organised, there is no doubt of it. A group of them have banded together and have made some kind of credo. I read about them in the Gazette," Holmes said, "though no one's certain whether they represent a genuinely religious group. When they're organised, they usually have some spiritual purpose, but their wearing the Union Jack is rather original, and seems to be their way of identifying themselves as a specific group of needy people in the city." Holmes continued, turning to me in his seat and offering me a look of curiosity over my interest in these people. "I don't like their playing on my conscience by draping themselves in the flag. It may seem a statement of patriotism, but for my money, it's a misplaced use of our symbolism." I did not hide that I was somewhat offended by the practice. "For my money, Watson, you can choose an interesting phrase now and again." We also saw one of the mendicants near the entrance to the central building of the campus. The man was not in any way hampering those who walked toward one of the oldest structures of my former college, but was near enough to make his presence observed. He appeared to have no interest in unwrapping himself from his blanket and walking the 30 feet from where he sat to accost us for some pennies. We turned on point and gave him no eye contact as we walked the pavement between the two neatly cut lawns that surrounded the frontage of the University of London. Professor Ducaney greeted us with a brief smile, though it quickly left him. "I do not know, Mr. Holmes. I do not see what good this will do. But here we are. I have some time before my last lecture today. What would you like to see?" "Especially your office, as you call it that," said Holmes. "Yes. While the dean of my department has implied I perform fair service to the school, my lack of tenure does not afford me a comfortable place for my chair and desk, and I more or less created this space for my needs." As he said this, the professor walked us down the length of his lecture hall, presently arranged to hold 40 or so, and through a door at the other end, which was some feet behind the last row of chairs. We followed him through and into this office of his. Holmes immediately went to 4 easels he saw placed near a hard and worn desk, littered with papers and essay books. He saw around the ceiling some pipes, some that elbowed down and others upward, and still others running across, passing near where the professor would be seated. "This room, I think, was really meant for storage when the building was planned out," Holmes said to the professor. "You've done a good turn for yourself using it the way you have. Otherwise, I presume, you would have had to do your work on a table near to where you lecture. No privacy for conferences and no art could be propped up for your inspection." "Just as you say, Mr. Holmes," Professor Ducaney responded. "Was there an open frame for the painting?" asked Holmes. "No, only a protective wooding, so the edges could not be damaged." "Very flat, then?" Holmes asked for verification. "Yes," Ducaney agreed. "If one takes into consideration the thickness of the canvas, there is no framing to make its profile impressive in any way. Might I see the other works you have here? Will you uncover them for me?" "Yes. They are only covered so that no one student would know which paintings I was reviewing during any given week." Professor Ducaney lifted the covers over the other three. Holmes examined these. He was lost in thought for a while. And the painting in question, was it covered when the floor washer poked his head in for those seconds? Holmes asked Ducaney. Yes, but even so they were not facing him. He looked at me and looked past all four of the paintings, each covered. The Artemis one was closest to my desk. And I notice you haven't moved the easel. Is that so? Yes, this is the one. And beside our custodial friend there was no one else. Yes. Holmes took some time looking out the window and craned his head to view the outside world in several directions. Professor, have you observed during the past several days one or several of the tramps asking for or making motions that imply they would appreciate a small donation? The ones wearing flags, yes, twice at least. Yet your campus is so stately. They make bold to approach the faculty and students who walk through to the main building. This has not been problematic. They have been chased away from Torrington Place. However, I have seen one or two favouring the side streets, Professor Ducaney stated. There was one on Torrington, who my friend and I observed as we alighted from our cab when we arrived. He was unobtrusive and little notice was given to him. In fact, he moved away from us when we stood on the walkway. He picked up his spread from the sidewalk and moved up the street, away from where a constable would probably be patrolling relative to your university's buildings. I would venture, I commented, that such a man would rather lose a coin than have to answer any questions from a policeman. Most logical a viewpoint, reasoned Holmes. The brief quiet of the room was broken by Holmes. Well, thank you, Professor. I have seen all I needed to see. Again, please keep up a good faith of hope. I can promise you nothing, but there are one or two ideas that have been on my mind since yesterday, and I need to make a few inquiries along these lines. We walked out of the rooms and back to the staircase. Holmes had chosen to leave Ducaney where he was, rather than ask him to walk upstairs with us. In fact, Holmes was moving through the building's main floor with more than average speed. Let us, Watson, take this exit here, Holmes said, with something of the expression he reserved for making a discovery for which he was not surprised. After I followed Holmes through one of the doors at the side of the building, he appeared to spot his expected quarry. I followed Holmes's line of vision and noticed across the field of grass that lay between the building and the less fashionable avenue that was the side street of the campus, a man carrying a blanket, walking toward the building's frontage and not looking in our direction. I see you, said Holmes quietly. Come, Watson, Holmes said, ducking behind a hedge below the building's windows. Notice our friend making much to do with his blanket, as if his profession required precision in the laying out of it. Holmes had become gleeful. He's merely stalling, hemming and hawing with his body movements as he uses his peripheral vision to spot his assignment. I was taken by this comment. His assignment? Us, my dear fellow, we are the assignment. And, my friend continued, our little mendicant can stay on his blanket until the cows come home to graze in Jersey. But I don't believe the occasional city constable, or the university unofficial kind, will allow him to stay there. No, Watson, the odds became a bit too crowded with the arrival of this chap, have they not? And this is an integrate form of keeping up with our movements, with one dovetailing the other. It is not an easy tale, and one that requires numbers to be certain. But what sets it apart from so many is the coordination. One person after another taking another's place, and then it happens again. The work and the dedication organised by one unknown person to move the strings and make the puppets dance. I can appreciate such a scheme. And one has to presume this began yesterday when the good professor visited Baker Street. Otherwise, why would these people make their plots and move their plan to spy on us when we left Baker Street less than 2 hours ago? Well, we are important to someone. Hatred is a passion that moves one as equally as love, and this is desire on someone's part. Let us leave our friend in mystery. One of his cohorts will no doubt find their way to our doorstep by the next day, especially should we stir the pot, and we shall. Together we took a stroll northeast, away from the university and in fact away from where we would usually go in a straight travel back toward Baker Street, or at the very least somewhere near there. It was a long way around central London, on a path that included an unnecessary ride on the Underground, followed by 2 cab rides, one a full scent and the other genuine, taking us back to James Street and after a few blocks on foot to my old address. We do have a clue, and it is before our eyes, and it's one I'm going to have to take hold of, Holmes said as we made our way to 221 and marched up the stairs. Mrs. Hudson, he called. Aye, Mr. Holmes, you can calm your speech down. The laundry waits for no sane man or wild detective. Mrs. Hudson, how goes that gammon? Any left of your French potato salad and apricot preserves? Thank you for deciding my menu for me, Mr. Holmes, she said, holding a basket of very damp clothes. She was smiling one of her rueful Scotswoman expressions, but with less the rosy cheeks than she gave on Sundays. Oh, Dr. Watson, I didn't see you there. Please put a restraint on Mr. Holmes and his hectoring manner. He'll have me prepare supper for him before sundown if he has his mind to it. I don't believe Mrs. Watson would put up with you making demands of her over what to serve on the table any more than she would give your patients advice for a head cold. No, Mrs. Hudson, I agreed with a touch of indulgence. And while you're about your business, Mrs. Hudson, Holmes said, be on your lookout, but without being so obvious, for any of the beggars near the front door on the street, especially should one be wearing a ribbon of our national colours. Let me know whether you spot one, but don't drop what you're up to and run to me about it. You can be certain I won't drop this all to let you know of houses blowing over from the Queen's Gardens. She complained back at him. But I do understand you, Mr. Holmes. Those of us without a consulting inspector plaque on the wall or runs around in disguises can still understand how not to advertise our shock at events and take a sly look at strangers. Can you join me here tomorrow, eventually? Holmes asked after Mrs. Hudson moved off. I'm sure I can, I told him. I will send to you how my day looks, after some of it develops. I left Holmes and made it home to where my wife was indeed preparing our dinner, which in our case for the evening would be roasted turkey and mashed potatoes, a cucumber salad, and for dessert, slices of melon in kirsch. How she managed the last on our budget and in her preparations was beyond me. But marriage brings to it new discoveries, even from someone you thought you knew all there was to learn. She smiled and told me how in June she would use strawberries instead of the melon, and that it would become a favourite of mine. I did not doubt this for a moment. This particular evening my wife asked me about my adventure with Holmes. This was something I had not experienced before, as my evenings usually involved my rewriting notes for further use and not a retelling of recent events. I realised I enjoyed this and was happy to watch my wife as she listened to an account of our riding here and there, to not be followed by one of these mendicants. She had some words about them and about how they might try and do some day labour instead of begging for charity. She was in no way mean, and our last Christmas being our first together, I discovered she was all forgiving to established organisations with work to feed the poor and find living for the homeless. We had not yet fully placed our new lives in the black, from the point of view of my medical practice's ledger, but February had indeed been better than January, which had been an improvement over the tail end of 1886. My wife held 2 different thoughts at the same time, and in thinking about her view of things, it occurred to me most of the public had a similar opinion, that is, an empathy for those who are in need and an expectation that they work for their living, if they were able. Of course, the mendicant does not place daily world practice in the same ideal. Their prescribed needs are so faint that one can understand how parting with a farthing is far less to the donor and more valuable to the recipient. I spent some thoughts on the mendicants and their needs, and how they had for many decades attempted to stand apart from society in their usual black rags and spiritual appearance. The few that I'd seen recently were somehow out of place from the previous generation of their kind. They had appeared to be better. You are only seeing certain members in their society, said Holmes, as he drew in the flavour of his pipe. We sat together while the sun lit up areas of the sitting room at Baker Street, its rays making their way through the cracks between the curtains. It was 4:30, and we had just enjoyed Mrs. Hudson's tea and cake. It had been 6 days since I had seen my friend. That following day after our visit to Professor Ducaney's lecture hall and office, before I could send him word of when I would be available to him, I received a note by messenger that I should not on any account come to Baker Street until I was expressly told by him to do so, and that when he finally sent for me, I should move for the world to ensure I could be there at the exact time specified. My notion of the Mendicants being more willful than those I had seen before in my lifetime had a ring of truth to it from Holmes' point of view, and that he had equally come to this idea. Those directed to be in certain places blend in with those who are genuinely without property and in need of charity. You have observed this, I asked. These few have been grafted onto the genuine mendicants, and all of London is their canvas. These are not for real beggars. They do not need charity, and they do not care about your spiritual well-being. Someone has organised a group of people who are actual mendicants, encouraged them to wear the national colours as a small pin. And that same someone has placed within their numbers a group of, let us call them, amateur mendicants, who, before they're being made to appear as the real thing, may just as easily been a group of train porters or rugby players. The genuine article has been put in place as a backdrop, preventing anyone from distinguishing this bunch of rogues moving amidst the whole. A small group of bad apples who, when among their innocent brethren, cannot be identified. And these amateurs do not appear to be, well, humble, I commented. Just so. For you can teach someone who is untrained to act the part of something he is not, but only to a degree. One cannot play Othello by merely pressing blackface and a wig onto one's head. The ruthless ones of which we speak have probably never truly known poverty, nor do they seek emotional and spiritual enlightenment. They are chaos and have their own plan, a plan as hidden as they hide in plain sight. Will you share with me any of your past few days? Am I still to presume there is some cloak of secrecy about your comings and goings in relation to your residing here nightly, or on the nights you choose to do so? I asked. To answer the last question first, yes, he replied immediately. I have presented to the general area of Baker Street the notion that I am working on a case which keeps me, for the most part, indoors. For the benefit of those who may have been watching me, I have visited 3 other art experts to lessen the importance of our interview with Professor Ducani. Hopefully my movements were observed, and if that was the case, doubtless they were reported to a higher up. What is the nature of the false scent you have laid? Well, Holmes answered, there have been other thefts recently as amazing as Professor Ducani's, and with the same requirement of a secret knowledge that went beyond the servant or those in the home. To study this and the pieces that have been stolen, I have been given the assistance of Lady Brixton Velle, who has an estate on Crown property, where Belgravia meets the open grasses of the hillside near Carnaby. It is to her home that I travel openly, and any mendicant, genuine or amateur, may be able to observe the hansom in which I ride. Moving into her lane, but 1, they tend not to go that deeply into wooded areas, and 2, there is no way he, or she, for as you know, there are lady mendicants in this business, could realise my purposes, once I travel inside her grounds there. Lady Brixton has given me one of her ground-floor parlours, where I have plunged myself into the investigation of the thefts of the valuable objets d'art. I am accidentally learning a good deal about the history of jewellery and paintings made by some of the great artists of the past 3 centuries. She has been my conduit to London's well-heeled, who have been victims in the same way as Ducani. Is it possible we were only seen by the lesser important, non-wrongful mendicant types, and that you need not take the precautions you have made in using her home for your studies? I asked him. I cannot play it that way, Watson. I have to presume that in the early 2 days of this matter, I was under the scope of their vanguard. These people are crafty themselves, as I have watched them operate. It has taken me 5 full days to discover only one thread of their operation, but such a discovery includes within it a greater understanding than one might believe. And beside the parlour, Lady Brixton has given me regular access to a service pantry, where I put on the guise of a tinker, and over that, my finer cloak and my silk morning hat. From her home, I stroll to the edge of her property to the grass field at the edge of Carnaby, where there is an old guard hut left over from the 17th century. It is at this kiosk that I store in a hidden manner my overgarments and become a tinker, to join society in my lowly workman's state. I have been busy, acquiring a pitiful lodging in the less desired part of East Road, near Pitfield Street, which is nothing more than a bedroom, a disgusting lavatory, and a shop area. The entire lease is no more than 400 square feet. But I am in business, at least from the point of view of those who might come close by to watch my work. During each of these past days, I appear to visit the Velle home for my researches, and then afterward I move to the lower West End where I ply my craft, which is genuine enough. "How can you keep this up?" I asked. "You will be fatigued to the point of grogginess, and you will make mistakes. You must do something about this. Even a man of your constitution will crumble, at least at the edges, with such a routine. In fact, as my doctor," and there was a touch of sardonic wit expressed in these first words of his statement, "you will be pleased to learn that I am moving into my tinker's hovel today, and will no longer lead the double life I have led, courtesy of Lady Brixton." "After I pack and leave for Denmark," Holmes said with a knowing laughter in his tone, "I will play my role solely as the tinker. What is this one thread of yours that you will follow?" "The bad apples I have been dogging have each taken an interest in watching the movements of people using particular buildings. Two I observed were interested in buildings for which I knew their purpose. They are buildings which do not hide their establishment. In the case of a third building, however, I could not unearth what happens inside of it, so after 3 days I decided to get some help. But now something is growing from this sapling, and its branches are reaching up to new light." I sent a telegram to Chadley Endover, who I knew from 2 of my university classes, and who now sits as secretary for one of the British golf courses, and has a private fascination about architecture and the buildings throughout London. When I mentioned I was interested in this particular building, a telegram came back to me in less than 3 hours, arranging for me a meeting between myself and the deputy of a minister for international trade, as well as a representative for the Home Secretary. This meeting was to be at White's on St. James Street. I had already moved into my tinker's lodging 2 sets of my usual clothes, but these were not worthy enough for such a meeting, and I had to return here and dress in fashion. When this unprofitable meeting was over, I rose to leave, and an usher whispered to me the chairman wanted to see me. Chairman. Their chairman's office had no chairman sitting in it. I walked upstairs to find Frederick Stanley, the Earl of Derby, standing in the office by the window. He did not ask me about my Christmas or New Year, but immediately wanted to know why I was making my investigation and what my interest was in the matter as a whole. "And from either of these meetings, what have you learned?" Sherlock Holmes sat back in his chair and took a brief moment. "As you have just learned, I am going to have to leave Baker Street for a good amount of time and place myself into the world of the very low but working class. And I am going to have to lean on you for the tiring duty of seeing to certain of my needs. It will not be enjoyable, and it will take you from your home some hours every other day, and these hours will be your dinner time, or so I suppose, so you can work your practice and be able to return home for bedtime. I am sorry to ask you this, but I will put some matters before you, and then you can decide whether this is worth the hardship to your honeymoon year, to come home to a cold plate at 9 at night." Holmes delivered this last speech with some genuine affection. He had never hid his disinterest in my marriage as a whole, or his view that having any connection with the fair sex was a distraction at the least, and opening one to eventual harm as time moved forward. But here he was asking to trespass on something that brought me joy, and that he understood. He knew I would say yes to this request of his, as I would to any, regardless of how tedious or bizarre it may prove to be. He probably did not realize that my wife would be the most accepting woman imaginable in the circumstance, and that she would serve our dinner later as a supper, and we would have our last meal together, and with as much late-night happiness as our lives would allow. We would also adjust our use of time to make this possible, and what it probably meant was that I would not see patients until 10 each morning. "You know, of course, that you may count on me for the least of troubles or greatest of efforts," said I. "Faithful friend, we have in store for us a plan of continuous duties. In my tinker's role, I have probably been more careful than any other false guise I have used in the past, and I have not only dressed and acted the part, but I have also arranged to have various items appear to be mended by me in the shop room attached to my bedroom. I travel the streets of London. I accept assignments and take with me from my customers their items in need of repair. I bring them back well improved." "I had no idea this had been one of your many talents." Holmes laughed. "And so working with metal is not among my skills, Watson. No, my items are taken from me daily after I return to my shop." From there they are brought to an actual tinker, formerly that by trade, and they are returned to me, and I present them as my handiwork. I have 5 in my employ, 3 constables who on their off time dress in a part that makes them look like those who would be my friends. 1 or 2 of them visit me for a while, and then leave with those items I collected that day, of which I promised repair. The other 2 of the 5 are not of the police force, but formerly their adversaries. Holmes barked a laugh. They work under the supervision of one of Tobias Gregson's assistants to ensure the work is done. These 2 are jailbirds, assisting the yard for reasons they are not aware, completing their work for me in a special area of the jail, prepared for this. Their payment will be to appear in court for an early release date. You have outdone yourself in your preparation and execution. I don't remember your working toward a goal where your pretense was so much a part of your day-to-day work. It will in fact get deeper, make no mistake about it. I have kept my tail on one of the amateur mendicants. I call him Pack, as he has built into his shirt a pack for holding things. What these things are, I haven't a clue. They may be of no concern, and it may merely be a clever way he holds items, as he moves about the city, interacting with the mendicants. I have never seen him approach a Londoner for a coin, though naturally he is dressed as the others and maintains a mendicant visage and rig. Over 4 days I realized Pack had a definite circle of movement, and it was obvious to me that he was working with the mendicants to learn about those persons, using various buildings, including that building I mentioned. Now, would you care to take a completely uninformed guess at the purpose of this building and how those who use it are employed? The Earl of Derby is president of the Board of Trade, I thought aloud. And you met with others associated with the Home Office and international sales, you said? Yes. Then the building must be used for that purpose. What kind of people walk in and out of it, and how is the building marked? Excellent, Watson, excellent, just so. How is the building marked? It is unmarked, and the people who walk into it and out of it are not remarkable in the least, they are quite common. But there is something which places them not exactly as civil servants and not as tradespeople. Also, they do not appear to be in sales or any of the professions. And there is in their demeanour a pride. And when I place them in some employment of what the Earl oversees, especially when one couples it with international dealings, the deduction I have reached is that these people and their duties involve communication. A new field of profession, combining traditional office work with the learned skills of machine use and requiring a speed and accuracy never before required in government and business. The building is dedicated to nothing less than the international communications between Britain and the principal financial capitals of the continent. Also Saudi Arabia, Bombay, Singapore, and the Far East, with more to come. All of this involves the improvement of the wired transmissions that are used for the buying and selling of stocks, bonds, commodities, and other sales placed on market boards throughout the finance capitals of the world. You're speaking primarily, so I assume, of telegraphy, said I. I suppose the telephone is making some headway in this arena, but I don't know anything about the telephone's use or non-use in transactions to which you refer, I added. You had it correctly in your first sentence, Watson. All of this traffic is of course through the submarine telegraph wires, as the process by its nature includes a copy of the transactions on paper. Any system for the immediate buying and selling of things of this kind would not last long if there were no paper trail, allowing a different kind of detective than myself to find the proofs he would need to shed the light on a given dispute, for or against a client versus a seller. So far, the telephone is used in such business as an inner office device, or for a buyer to call his agent and offer him instructions. But the final movement of any sale and its verification is by telegraphy. Also, and no less important, is the international communications of people for social purposes not related to a business transaction. Important notifications along with unimportant ones as well, unimportant from the point of view of government. Reports of births, deaths, illness, some fortunate event, or mere greetings for the sake of the notification itself. The sending of a wire with a paper verification has become an indispensable medium for everyday life. Telegraphs, as you know, are made possible by the laying of submarine cables. European ones are all owned and operated by many companies, as these are investments requiring vast sums that only private capital could raise. For example, the ones which run to the Asian financial capitals I just now mentioned have all been organized into one conglomeration, the Eastern Telegraph Company, invented by the pioneer of this field, John Pender. So many projects of this kind are worldwide, and so many investors like this man Pender are behind these projects. And this spy who poses as a mendicant is following up on the employees of this establishment. So it would seem, replied Holmes. This man Pack, why not have him prevented from doing whatever it is he is doing by legal channels and the courts if necessary? Why all of the detective work and the government interest, I asked, enjoying another cup of my former landlady's tea. That's what my meeting was about. These gentlemen of government and finance had a good stand-up when they learned how my case was developing, and in a way they believe that I work for them. Or, at the very least, they think I will take my orders from the Earl and run my efforts in the direction which protects their interests. I dare say they will enter the fray when all comes to a boil. Here's something, Holmes, said I. Is there something recent that makes an interest in the comings and goings of those working in this building, dedicated to communication, more important today than, let us say, 3 months previous? I made a similar question, but the Earl of Derby would not say. The financial and government men want a report from me sooner than later, and wish me to deliver to them the fruits of my work product. And the fate of friend Ducaney? Was my obvious, assertive question. Small beer from their point of view would be my guess, Holmes answered. This was not the first time a government concern showed its head while Holmes was following a private inquiry. Holmes was circumspect about how he handled any situation of this kind, and he usually determined to find a ground where tandem interests were served. In this way, government would be satisfied, but not at the expense of his client's original interest. Over the next few weeks, said Holmes, while from London's point of view I will be first in Copenhagen, then Stockholm, and then Helsinki, I would ask you to occasionally come here and direct delivery persons, who will arrive with large packages. I will be sending messages to you at your home, letting you know what days and times I will need you at Baker Street. Whenever possible, I will let you know of those evenings when I am taking a day off, as it were, and my returning for a brief respite to my lodgings here, for my own bed and bath, and Mrs. Hudson's provender. Such visits will not allow me to arrive as either myself or as the tinker version of myself, and I will have to be careful. We cannot push away any of our mendicant friends, or their bosses will learn something happened that was out of routine, and they might grow suspicious. You may count on me to follow your instructions during these days, I told him, but certainly your predicting this will take you many weeks is an impressive plan on your part, and I hope your work is appreciated by the Earl and these others, who believe you would be giving good service to them, though they are not your clients. If things go in the direction over which I fear, between us, my client's interests may be trampled by what government believes to be in the public interest, Holmes stated. This is why you might presume correctly that I have become dissatisfied with the current circumstance. And the following day, with a businesslike fanfare that was understated, but made obvious to anyone who showed interest in the frontage Sherlock Holmes's home on Baker Street, a trunk was loaded into a cart under the direction of Holmes and sent to King's Cross Station. After lunch, we parted in front of the door to his lodgings by shaking hands, and before a candid London, he took a cab to ostensibly make his train. Twice there had been a delivery of some boxes, of which I had received from Holmes a message to be at his lodging at an exact day and time, and on each occasion I had to be on the street to accept them. I made some show over signing for them, ensuring anyone who may have been watching the front door that there was no one at home at the B flat. I made certain my voice carried, but only a little, and used a phrase about acting for an absent Sherlock Holmes. I directed the packages, some massive and some small, to be brought upstairs. The second time these deliveries arrived, the delivery man was Sherlock Holmes. He was not in the best health and told me he had become overly tired and his sleep routine had been poor. He hated where he lived, the company he kept, and the dull routine of having to keep up his charade. He said he had never before gone as long as he had without real nourishment and good conversation. He laughed this off for my sake and showed his usual excitement over being able to have a good, tough case to work on. But I could tell he was playing down the effect this had taken on his constitution. I leave my rooms by 7 and travel throughout London. I return to those who hired me for my services their repaired metal objects, most often tankards and other kitchen utensils and cookery, and interact with all around me who may want my services. I must maintain a low grade of quality and materials, so I do not anger those in the genuine profession. I must present to the community a poor tinker, being hired by those who could not afford the more worthy in the craft, so I am not of interest to anyone. In this way I may speak to the mendicants, and I am slowly learning of their organisation. I stand around the area where they are, and I busy myself with a small part of my job. I observe the amateur mendicants, as I call them that, and I watch as they interact with those who genuinely ask for alms from members of the general public. Like the amateurs, I have effectively blended into the world that is the lowest class of the city. But I don't get back to my lodging until 7, and then I am up late, supposedly working my craft while eating food that is not giving me the best of sustenance. We should make arrangements for you along these lines, I said, becoming concerned for my friend's well-being. We cannot. A design is being engineered by some intelligence, and I cannot for a moment waver from the path I have chosen to uncover the scheme in play. The plan of organising these poor folk so that the bad apples can receive reports from them and act upon them in their own ways is based on the greatest of planning. My meeting this challenge must be similar, otherwise someone will suspect a rat. But I have good feelings about what I have found out at this point, Holmes said, with a part smile of satisfaction. He was relishing his evening at Baker Street. During dinner he had thirds, and Mrs. Hudson packed more for him to take the following morning. She had reported to us that there were no more of the beggars anywhere on the street, that they had taken their time in leaving, over days in fact. The day you left, she said, there were 2 couples, each on their own blankets, at one end of Baker Street, then the other. Over 4 of 5 days the numbers went down, and they became not often at all, and now they're gone. After our dinner together, I immediately looked forward to a similar evening, but a week went by and still another. I was beginning to get worried for him, but then one afternoon, during my consultancy, my wife interrupted me with a message to meet Holmes at an exact location not far from where I knew he had his tinker's lease. His note told me I should dress poorly and carry no watch and have no more than a few coins in my pocket. He was his tinker's self and the ruin of a man. As his new neighbours did not know the real man, from their point of view, the tired and aching metal worker was who they had come to expect him to be, but at a cost. It was as if his disguise had worked to shape him to become a person and not a persona. "You've become sick," I said to him. "I realise you are playing for serious stakes, but you must come home. To Baker Street, I mean. And it must be tonight." I tried putting into my voice a commanding statement instead of a plea, but this meant nothing to Holmes or his plans. "We are here at this place for a reason, and I'm going to have to call on the Watson of old, where on occasion he attempted with me to place himself in a difficult situation for a good reward." Holmes spoke these words as he appeared barely able to stand. He did not look at me, and hadn't done so since I arrived, meeting him at the desired street corner he had specified. Though I had said my words of dissatisfaction at the shell of a man he had become, he merely looked across the street at nothing in particular as he spoke to me. There was no conversation, only his instructions. But his call to arms did not hide his frailty. His muscles had shrunk, and I could tell even in the early darkness of the evening that his face was without good colour. "Follow me at several paces behind, and do not look at me but interest yourself in storefronts and the occasional street concessions," were his only words before walking up Eversholt Street. I did as he commanded, and over the course of following him for a lengthy time, the streets around us went from the grimy lower class to the upper middle. Eventually I followed him to the triangle at Hampstead Road, and afterward we doubled back and walked the half-mile to Robert Street. With Regent's Park but a little way from where we found ourselves, we were in what was a fine district in the city. "Turn here," Holmes whispered loudly to me as he ducked around the corner. We waited some minutes, and eventually Holmes stepped away from where he stood, on which I had not noticed previously was a grate. He took from his pocket a key and inserted it into a keyhole within the metal slats on where the grid of iron met a locking mechanism. Holmes looked up, and I followed his eyes as he intended I would. A sign on a charcoal brick building without distinction read, "Kenner Warehouse," and below it, number 4. I stared up at dull smoked glass windows and rusted fire escapes and bent rain gutters. Together we lifted the grate and opened what was a large man-sized entrance into what I assumed was some type of service route below the street. I went first down some metal stairs, which were fitted into the concrete that surrounded me as I descended. Holmes came afterward, lowering the grate above him so it refitted itself into the pavement. "What is above us?" I whispered my question to Holmes. "A warehouse for some of the most expensive furniture in London, though from its appearance one would not think it so. Many of the shops on Hampstead use it, each having a section of it quartered off to its purposes, and the owner charges each renter their sections at amounts of greater or lesser value, solely based on square footage. Very democratic. Though in this part of our city, that word scarcely leaves the mouths of the residents. We walked perhaps no more than 40 feet. We turned a corner, went down a ladder, and moved again a number of feet in a given direction. We are now even with the lowest level of the warehouse, which inside holds an elevator, one of the old freight ones. On this floor the more majestic pieces are stored, the dining tables and hearth-set pieces and ceiling, high cases for fine china, that would not be able to be kept in a display room, unless it were of a high vault. But I digress from our purpose. Follow this line of bricks before us, and as we walk another 20 paces this way, keep your eyes fixed for where the mortar around the bricks has crumbled. Your humble servant found a chink along this line and expanded it during the past week. I saw where my friend had cracked the line of mortar and followed it during our final steps. Holmes stopped at the point where there was a definite opening to look into the building. He stepped back some feet, letting me enjoy the view into the building he had worked to create. At first, whatever I was attempting to bring into my sight was simply too bright to conceive. But after some seconds, I adjusted how I was looking and avoided staring directly into what was a light fixture, immediately before me and inside of the floor of the building. I also looked upward, as that was half of the show. The room I was seeing into was a vaulted one, vast and that of 2 stories. I looked to see 2 other light fixtures across from where I was standing, spaced out evenly every 40 feet, so that it had to be more than 100 feet to the other side at the far end. The width was shorter, perhaps 80 feet, and the overall effect was that of a mighty keep beneath the nondescript warehouse. Perhaps 2/3 of the vast area was filled with magnificent furnishings, but another third in the centre was populated by over a score of men. Strange what they had done, for they had positioned the most opulent pieces in such a way that they had constructed an arranged living space, equal to any magnificent room in Kensington Palace. And indeed, the men I saw in this instance were enjoying the room as though they were at the Carlton Club or Boodle's. 2 niches on either side of this area had been created by the use of large bookcases, making several distinct places of meeting. In the central area of them were 2 3-cushion billiard tables and a long bar, serviced from where spirits were poured in the finest stemware and tankards. Watching the men's reaction to their activities, I could guess at their enjoying good conversation, laughter and storytelling. Cigar and pipe tobacco were enjoyed, and though there appeared to be no plated dishes, there was a large selection of prawns, lobster, and other such fare presented on a side table, featuring an elaborate bouquet of roses. This main room, for lack of a better term, used various furnishings on 3 sides, with the 4th being the actual wall of the lower portion of the warehouse to complete the rectangle. This real wall included a fireplace that had a medium fire below a venting, presumably to the sidewalk, and above this fireplace was mantel. On the mantel, held within a golden open frame, was a painting of a woman bathing in a pool at dusk her robe and bow and arrows on the rocks beside, and in view of her on the hill above, a stag surrounded by dogs. I looked to my friend. "Did you get the full picture, Watson?" was his dry comment, not a question. All I could manage was to stare open-mouthed in wonder. "I need more time," Holmes said after the lengthy walk back to where I had met him. We were again at the corner near his tinker's home, and once more he was speaking without looking at me. "We are heavy in Mendicant country, but they are not abroad at night time. Only the amateurs who change from their beggarly costume into their smartest fashion are about. You just saw them not 20 minutes ago." "So you showed me the directors of the Mendicants?" I asked. "Well, perhaps the middle management, Watson," he answered without being glib. A hard, hacking cough took hold of him for a full minute. "I'm afraid it's back to our routine until we can meet again, and we must to plan our next move. Our meeting will be in less than a week, regardless of what I discover or fail to discover. I need my bed and perhaps 2 nights away from here, which would serve as a vacation from my investigation. Your coming here was dangerous, and we could only afford to do this the one time. But I had to show you the vault room, and wasn't that something? I told you an intelligence moves about the city, and one of the things it has done is conceive that version of a private club, which presumably meets without permission or lease or license." "Why do they do it?" I asked. "Oh, at its roots I'm certain it's no different than the Athenaeum or the Reform Club, though below the roof of the warehouse no Phileas Fogg will be found." "Then it's a gentleman's club, plain and simple." "Not so plain and hardly simple. As I said, I believe it operates without permission from the warehouse, or a bribe has been given to someone. Also, it is unlicensed in the matter of the serving of spirits, but we need not think too heavily about it. All business ventures need a place to reward its managers separate from the lower-level employees. It is here the amateur mendicants can gloat over their achievements and act as actual gentlemen do in more respectful circles. You observe the bad apples more or less all at once. This is where the boss meets with each and gets reports and talks about paintings under the supervision of Professor Ducaney, and whether Mr. Holmes and Dr. Watson have visited him, and what other objects may be at hand for the taking. And more importantly, this is where they hold discussions related to the building used for telegraphy and the international sales of stocks and bonds and the like. These middle managers do all of this and know all that they know." I was astounded. These managers have put themselves in specific places to learn what they learn. I do not have it all, but I am almost there. "You still won't bring this to an end?" I asked, hoping he would turn the matter over to official persons and end this business which had reduced him to a work slave, with his vigour gone and powerful enemies surrounding him. "There is no one in my net as of this time," said he. "It is your own ego, Holmes." I was loud in my undertone. "Thank you for not using my name while we are here," was his minimal response. "But you have so many of the local officials at your disposal, and the government, regardless of their motives, is behind you. You are becoming sick. You are going to collapse from overwork. You will be of no use to anyone after a few more days and nights, working yourself as you have been doing. You can meet with the assistants to the cabinet ministers and give them all the particulars to watch the warehouse and the mendicants. And watch as they mess it all up by inaction, or by waiting for approval, or worse, by raiding the wrong place for information of no real value, but something that will give their single department praise at the expense of a coordinated effort," he said. "You are not yourself a coordinated effort either," I said. "Be careful on your way home. Catch a cab as soon as one presents itself. Do not, around here, be the man trying to hail one," he admonished. Then he walked away. 4 days later, a telegram arrived at my home while I was with a patient, and my wife answered it for me in the affirmative. I had to reschedule a client from his planned appointment on this day to the following day, but otherwise I was presentable in the small parlour that was in our home and not my consultancy. My wife prepared a wonderful tea and sandwiches. The man who had come to see me was Herbert Lonsdale, a representative from the Home Office. Lonsdale was a heavy man with large shoulders and good muscles. He had white hair on half of his head, and large mutton chops which surrounded his cheeks. His was a hard face that told the story of countless political manoeuvres over many long years. His belly pushed outward, and his legs were heavy. Once upon a time he could have been the strongman for a travelling circus. Perhaps what he did for the office he served was not too far from that mark. His suit was a perfect pinstripe, his collar was immaculate, and one had the impression that despite his size, Lonsdale took some time with his presentation. "Dr. Watson, we are concerned that your colleague, Mr. Holmes, has vanished from the city at a time when certain departments of government need to locate him," Lonsdale said. "Do you mean Tobias Gregson has been unable to contact him?" I was taken aback. I do not know this person or in what capacity he is serving the Home Secretary. He stated with a heavy of use each word, as if the words themselves were spun from gold. "I see," I said, though I really didn't have an answer for Lonsdale. "Is there something your office wanted of Mr. Holmes?" "Well, yes. The Secretary was hoping he would report on the progress he has made with what he is investigating." Generally, Mr. Lonsdale, Mr. Holmes tends to work at his own pace and by his own methods. Unless he has expressly stated he would meet with you or your secretary, I shouldn't necessarily expect him to be at certain places to bring you information. This is damnable. Damnable. Our office expected cooperation from your friend. Who is running this damned show anyway? Who indeed, were my thoughts. Then I had it. Lonsdale had come over on his own decision in an attempt to fish for Holmes's progress and curry favour with his boss. My interview with this man was not official in the literal sense of government, though some aspect of Lonsdale's being here may have a positive effect on matters. It was less about government and more about political gain, and this man's attempt to deliver the goods, as it were. I felt this in my being. "Mr. Lonsdale, if I did have any fresh news about Mr. Holmes and his investigation, who in your office should I contact? The Home Secretary?" "The Home Secretary would appreciate you communicate through me in this matter." "I thank you for coming over," I said to Lonsdale. "Excellent, Dr. Watson. I knew I would see things right with you. I have followed with interest your accounts of Mr. Holmes. I especially appreciated the speckled band in scarlet." "Thank you," said I. I rose. Mr. Lonsdale followed suit. I saw him to the door and he smiled, and we shook hands once more before he walked to his waiting carriage. I was done for the day, upset that I had to rework my client into tomorrow's day, and upset that my client was put off for this bit of nonsense. Another week went by, and I became worried for my friend. No message nor meeting, no request from him that I do anything for his benefit. I thought of seeing Tobias Gregson to learn whether the movement of Tinker's work items were on pace, so I visited Scotland Yard and found him in his new office not far from Lestrade's, where I had been 2 months previous. "No, Doctor, we have not received word from Holmes, and this troubles me. There has been no work for the Tinker," he smiled at the use of the term, "to be done by Jimmy and his friend, and then return to Holmes through the method we set up." "Did you create a contingency should you wish to find him in an emergency?" I asked. "How would we do that?" he asked. "I thought," I replied with caution, "that Holmes was coordinating his efforts with you and with others in government." "That may very well be," Gregson said, "but this is after all Mr. Holmes's plan, and I am just doing a part. He is the centre of it as far as I know." I left confused. I had different understandings of how Holmes was applying his considerable talents, and I could not determine to whose interest he was working. Though I am not a lawyer, I did understand that our view into the Kenner warehouse was completely legitimate, and with the possible exception of the technical breach of cement and mortar removed by Holmes to look into their lower vault, the courts would grant a warrant to seize the Artemis and Actaeon painting, and that would close the matter for which Holmes was originally hired. Further, based on some of the more dramatic aspects of Holmes's character, I wouldn't put it past him to enter the premises, representing himself to be a serviceman there, to repair the elevator, take the painting, and leave the club members of the secret Kenner Club with a mystery of their own. Regardless of which avenue Holmes would choose, certainly the matter relating to the painting was no longer the subject of interest to his deeds, as he had found the painting and merely had to recover it. These thoughts going through my mind after leaving Gregson, I took a walk through the inner temple gardens on my way back home. It then occurred to me, with all of the flowers beginning their bloom, that today was the first day of spring, and that my friend had been at work on his case, now expanded to whatever dimension that may be, for some 5 weeks. The walk was glorious, and excited by what I was enjoying, and thankful for the distraction relating to Holmes and his current situation, I went quickly home to my wife in hope she would join me for a better, longer walk of this kind. I was met by her ashen face and sad expression, one she had not ever showed to me until that moment. "Your friend is in your consultancy in the bed," she said to me. I immediately understood what she meant by the words, "your friend." The recovery bed was in fact a spare bed I had never used for my practice until that moment. It was simply an extra bed that had to be kept somewhere, so my wife made it look as if it belonged in a medical consultancy, and there it remained in the corner of my office, taking up space. Under its covers was Sherlock Holmes. My joy in seeing him was immediately replaced by my fears for his state. He was pale and shivering. His palms, wrists, and his cheeks and forehead were ice to the touch. I prepared for him a medicine that would bring down his fever and help him to rest. Knowing the following day I would have patients coming to see me, I worked with my wife to rearrange the inner setting of my office and its outlay of furnishings and professional equipment. One thinks of doing these things, but it is not until an actual call to arms that one turns to the task itself. When we had completed this, my office was much improved, and what was my storage had become a small alcove where Holmes helped me to move the bed. And the following morning, none of my patients who visited me would learn there was someone, exhausted and prostrate, in the area behind a screen and around the corner from the consultancy office proper. It was a full 2 days until I had a meaningful discussion with Holmes. My wife administered to him, and he turned out to be a better patient than I thought he would be. He did not make his usual comments about my lack of talent, telling me the only thing I was suitable for operating was a triage tent in Afghanistan. Holmes was genuinely kind and receptive to both of us, and occasionally my wife and I smiled at one another over the whimsical circumstance in which we found ourselves. That is, my seeing patients and giving them medical advice, then checking in on Holmes, and then doing it over again when a new client came to see me. On the 3rd day, some of his strength had returned to him. Yes, I knew these days here would not result in your doing anything but treating me, and I am glad for it, and for the rest and recovery you and your wife have given me. When we moved the bed into this place, though it be nothing more than a small cage of room, it was exactly what I knew was best for me. I think your office now a wonder. A consultancy with a genuine bed area attached. Not a fully separate area, however, as I'm still too much a part of your clients' conversations. Mr. Linkletter clearly is getting out of his coal work by pretending to be congested by a bad case of the flu. This is not so, of course. He has merely copied the symptoms from a medical alert posted on the wall of the break room at his employer's works near Edgware. Widow Tanner would do well to stay in her home and wear more clothing. She is suffering from chills brought on by it being March and her failure to wear anything under her blouse. One would have you believe she thought it was July. This Gabbers McCollin needs no remedy at all, and should instead forget where he keeps his bottle. From his cough, I know his ailment is caused by his use of a home brew, popular with Irish, who live in the forested areas of Longford and Cavan counties. My wife was delighted. "Now Mr. Holmes can stay with us and share your adventures," she said to me, "and naturally he can write about them and publish them in a section of the British Medical Journal that deals with solving strange diseases." And, Holmes said, it would be quite interesting reading, and if I did such a thing, those who subscribed to that journal would open to its pages first thing when it arrived by post. Every month there would be a story of a false medical client, with clues to what the perpetrator patient had done to fool the medical man. We shall call him Dr. Sunwat. This was too much, with my wife doubled over with laughter. I continued his thought for him. No doubt he shares rooms with a man who at the end of each of these medical appointments uses his deductive skills to expose the faker for what he is. This Mr. Lockshire would walk into the consultancy, and after 3 or 4 questions, the matter would be solved, and the learned medical professionals who read this in the journal would kick themselves for taking only 3 years of medical school instead of a 4th to learn about the medical science of deduction. Then they would cancel their subscriptions, and that would be all. I don't think I had ever seen Sherlock Holmes laugh with such heartiness. I was also taken by this display of overboard revelry, as it was unexpected and quite joyful. It was, sadly, broken up, as Holmes's laugh became a cough and then a deep hacking, which continued so much so that he could not for a long minute take in the water which he sorely needed. Later that evening we fed him soup, and in the spirit of good comradeship we all had the same, sitting around him as he sat up in bed and talked with us about his future plans. With each moment of his discussion, I became more and more upset. I did not hide my feelings about his situation, and he saw my reactions to each step of the scheme he was laying before me. A few sentences into this discussion, my wife sensed that it entailed Holmes's profession, and she politely excused herself to wash up. The laughter I won't apologise for, though its origin began with the medical jest I made of some of your clients, and for that I will apologise. But the humour was very welcome. My spirits and my strength have been sapped from me these last weeks. It has been a strain, and the simple pleasures of friendship bring home just how much pressure I have been under since the new part of my work began. Your tinker has gone missing, or so says Gregson. Yes, Mackie was a useful fellow, but he has now walked away from the middle of his 2nd month's rent, and I will not miss him or his lifestyle. He wasn't a bad sort, but he had an awful state in his surroundings. Holmes adjusted his sitting up in bed. This is my last night here. Tomorrow we shall move me, if I can count on your help, to Baker Street, where not only will I enjoy a day's sleep there, but I have a meeting with the same people I saw at White's. The matter is shaping up, and I wish to help out the government, as I promised. Afterward, I will have to exert myself. There is much to be done. I advise against it, I said to him. I gave him my views about how he might conclude the case relating to Professor Ducaney and his precious Diana painting, and the secret club enjoyed by these scofflaws who had abused some ability to get into the lower floor of the warehouse. That part of things does seem to be ended, does it not? Should I use my talents at this point in the matter, I could bring an end to these thefts, which in fact have lessened during the past week. But I believe that has more to do with the overall long-term scheme of these rascals than anything done on my part, though to some extent I have already hampered their plans. There are deeper waters, Watson. Deeper waters. You shall learn of this. I need you to call on Mrs. Hudson and prepare her for my return. I need to be in my surroundings tomorrow, and I'm excited for it. You need to rest for a month at least. Besides what you call a recovery, which it is not, you have worn yourself out to the core. How is this so? Because what I have not shared with you is how I've been working over 12 hours each day, 15 in some cases. Our tinker friend walked and walked throughout the city. Holding myself out to the community as someone without means and living off of the poorest food imaginable was hard on my body. Holmes had said Henry Matthew, that is, Lord Llandaff, Home Secretary, was sending Herbert Lonsdale to represent him, and Holmes mentioned to me he had already met this man in the preliminary meeting at White's. I said I had met with him as well, here at my home, and that the man confounded me and seemed to have no real interest in truly sharing information. Not surprising, he agreed. And the other man who is coming has proved to be so far just as useless. He is some assistant to a trade commission, and he gives his name but little else. These two, Watson, were at what I had called my unprofitable meeting. They have only their own interest in seeing me. This will be more of the same with their posturing and attempting to explain to me why I should celebrate their importance in matters. The Earl of Derby and Lord Llandaff are very good men, but they are unaware of how serious this matter is, meaning what I am investigating and to where my deductions have taken me. I should put them in the picture, but it is difficult to do so with the particular gatekeepers they employ to prevent inquisitive subjects from bothering their days. Now at Baker Street, everything had been arranged by Holmes, with the assistance of Mrs. Hudson, to make him appear as healthy as possible. For his meeting, it was only I who knew that Holmes had been confronted with illness and fatigue, the likes of which he had never before experienced. The men showed up, and after being introduced to Samuel Farnsworth, a commissioner for the Board of Trade, he, Lonsdale and I took seats as Holmes began what he had to share with them. Throughout this city are a group of mendicants who wear Union Jack pins and work to collect bits of money. They are poor and are, from their point of view, actually spiritual in their receiving arms. They have been organised to do so by one Tackle Arms, whose actual name I have not yet discovered. Arms has given them the ribbon to wear, and from him they take their instructions of where to be. He gives them small amounts of money if their day is without success on their own account. He gives to them blankets and suggests locations for lodgings. He has clothing for them if they are in need. He packs around various gifts for them. Arms is also in command of a group of more than 20 others, amateur mendicants, if you will, who move about the real ones and glean from them the answers to certain questions about who goes where, and at what times, and whether anyone was seen with anyone specifically looked for. The answers to these questions are reported to a central brain who determines how this information may be exploited for profit. For example, to determine how a building may be penetrated, what is most probably inside of it, and how to extract from it an object of considerable value by placing a man inside of that building, hidden until he can either overhear when the best moment would be to steal the object when the moment best presents itself. That is, these others who play at being mendicants are a spy organisation. In the beginning, the purpose of this group was to target certain people to learn where they had kept valuable items, small enough to be stolen, yet richly enough to be worth the time and efforts of their people. But at some point, this changed, and their thefts have more or less ended, and they instead have become interested in a greater prize. Arms is the street contact for some higher up, but in no way is he the brain behind the organisation. The intelligence who orchestrates all of it appears not only to have ordered the end to the thefts, but also has devised to learn what goes on in offices where the Board of Trade has set up its communications, that is, its telegraphy, for national and international trade. A certain number of these 20, probably only a handful, have worked to penetrate this building and know its secrets. This brain speaks probably to an intermediary, who in turn speaks to Arms, and Arms to the several. As an example of how the thefts operated, there was a painting and its movement among the art world was discovered, and it was stolen at a moment's decision. One of these amateur mendicants had his blanket out in front of the building, where the painting had been kept temporarily and without adequate security, and the painting was taken, and under the blanket it went, before the eyes of all who walked by him. After the theft, he blended in with the many genuine mendicants throughout the city, who were then being used as a smokescreen for the various other thefts similar to his, to bring reward to this vast conspiracy. After this, Holmes paused while his guests sat there in awe. He concluded with, "I'd like to be taken to the building of which I speak. Speed is not important, but instead careful planning will be needed to upset the course of Baron Maupertuis." After a long moment's pause where our guests showed their complete astonishment, a "no" was interjected by Lonsdale, followed by, "That is out of the question." The Dutch financier and confidence trickster Palos Maupertuis, 11th Baron of Deventer, has moved about your trade department and has done much potential damage to the security of its infrastructure by his learning about how it may be exploited, though I cannot at this time say how. At the moment Holmes concluded his explanation of what he had learned over the past month, I saw our guests' expressions of shock and incredulity, yet Holmes continued his construe. Over the past several weeks, I have gone from being a nuisance to his efforts to becoming the worst enemy he had ever imagined. I have outflanked his battalions of false mendicants. I have moved his properties from one place to another. I have penetrated one of his secret strongholds to the point he had to abandon it and give up various properties he had stolen, and from there I shipped them to my lodgings. Further, I took authority of one of his shipments of silver he intended to be sent to his banker in Switzerland, and to spite him, I sent it to a lamb rancher outside of Aberdeen. I set fire to his carriage factory, ordered 2 of his bankers staying with him at his leased mansion in Westminster, out of the county using false documents I created, and on them forged the signature of Godfrey Lushington. I stole outright his private railway coach, dropped part of a shipment of copper wire he received on the docks into the Thames, poured maple syrup over his supply of fine writing paper from Bruges, and I took from him his pocket watch. Holmes was not well. Though he was animated and rocked back and forth in his chair, he clearly appeared on the edge of being mentally deranged. He has worked hard to discover who I am, and is very nearly there, Holmes stated. Before he does figure out my purposes, we must act to protect the interests of the Trade Board. Mr. Holmes, I did not come here for drama. It was assured to me that you would be a serious person with genuine approaches for safeguards, and not flights of fancy. Farnsworth stated with some passion. Oh my, Mr. Holmes, you are not well, said Lonsdale. I understand deep mania and fits. You are most certainly there. Further, the Baron is the most trusted of foreigners in Britain today. He has moved through our departments, as you say, but only to help his country in the greatest of success by learning from us our communications operation. In fact, Mr. Holmes, said Farnsworth, while he can do no harm to any of our facilities, what he has done is research into how to improve his own telegraphy in a large venture involving his Dutch company and an equal company in Indonesia, where he is aiding his nation at war there by various improvements to their infrastructure, made possible by his learning our communication system. He has come here as a student of our methods related to the laying of submarine cables from this kingdom to the east and our use of telegraphic equipment. Yes, Lonsdale chimed in, Baron Maupertuis is interested in building a Netherlands-Sumatra communications company and has turned to this kingdom as his model. You, as Her Majesty's subject, should count yourself proud and at the disposal to this great creation, and not in opposition to it. I had no idea, said Farnsworth to me, that Mr. Holmes was suffering from an infirmity. Nonsense, said I. He is recovering from fatigue, but there's no reason not to accept him at his word. No doubt he will give particulars to show evidence for his efforts. Fires can be verified, as can the movement of personal and real properties, as well as many of the other things to which he has stated. It appears you might not come along on what's best for government, Dr. Watson. Tying your strings to your friend's absurd and confused bits of ramble removes you from being viewed as a man of reason, said Lonsdale. Lonsdale spoke to Farnsworth. Might we please remove ourselves from here at once? We shall arrange for us a meeting of repute. I have at my office all of the particulars to hand, and we only have to send 6 or 7 messages to important persons, and we will have the matter done with, and Baron Maupertuis will be protected from this maniacal, so-called detective before us. Good day to you, Dr. Watson, said Lonsdale, walking to the door with Farnsworth following. They did not believe me, Watson. What could I do? What is wrong with these gentlemen? What is wrong with them is their private agendas, I assured him, though I may have said that to placate my friend, as I had to admit to myself that Holmes had done a poor job in attempting to understand who was before him, and what they might do to protect what they undoubtedly saw as some kind of important achievement in placing this Baron in a favourable light. Watson, fetch a cab. We must be off at once. Holmes, I can act for you. Please stay here. I will bring to you whomever you choose. No, Watson. It cannot work that way. What time is it? Almost 2:30. We must go to the offices of the Board of Trade and see the Earl of Derby. I realised there was no stopping him, and it made sense to at least be by his side, so I did as he asked. As it turned out, it was a task with less hardship than we imagined, as Frederick Stanley was at his office, and Holmes had no issue with using the Earl's private door off of the main corridor, which we found by following the wall of his outer office to what anyone would presume was another door to the same, but closer to his chambers. There goes Mr. Farnsworth, perhaps to his offices on the other side of the stairwell. We will tap on this and see what happens. It took some time for a response, but when it came, we were greeted by a middle-aged woman in a smart, dark green dress. This is not a proper door for the public, she said. Holmes pushed her in, and the door opened. To our left was an open space with another woman and a man, and what we knew to be the entry one would find themselves should they have entered by means of the correct door. To our right was a closed door, and Holmes went into this, and I followed him. Your Lordship, Holmes said. From his desk, Frederick Stanley stood and said, Holmes, I need to speak with you in private. Into the room came the man we had seen in the outer workspace. My friend is harmless, Your Lordship, I said on Holmes's behalf. Is he indeed? Said Stanley. "Your lordship, I will call for a constable," said the young man. "Is whatever your harmless friend has to say something that would prevent my staff from their assignments?" Stanley asked me. "Nothing like that at all, my lord," I responded. "He would probably suggest that should be the case." "That should be the case," said Holmes. "Rogers," Stanley said to the man, "see to the ladies and return to your present duties. I am in no danger with Mr. Holmes nearby, and do not alarm anyone in the immediate area. This stays completely within this office and goes no further." Rogers gave his superior a perfunctory, "Yes, my lord," and closed the door. "Samuel Farnsworth reported to me that you were in fine dramatic spirits, Mr. Holmes. It is good to see you do not disappoint. Why did you not perform similarly at White's? The place could do with a good shake-up now and then. I usually have to run out to the ice to enjoy something physical, but you bring it all into the offices." "Your lordship has been giving Baron Maupertuis carte blanche to many facilities." Stanley was still standing, his eyes fixed on Holmes. "No, sir, I have not. To be precise about it, that comes from the offices of the Home Secretary, and one of his staff, Lonsdale, I do not recall his Christian name, has been ushering the Baron about these past several days." "But your office is vital to the Baron's tour of friendship, or whatever is being called his comings and goings here at your office. Is that not so?" "No, again, Mr. Holmes, that is not so. This office does not concern itself with the Home Secretary's political decisions. This board is functionary and does not make policy." "Yes, but it is in fact functionality." Holmes stressed the particular word, of which the Baron is interested, as he couldn't give 5 figs about the decision-making process. "Regardless of what he has pronounced to government departments, you are his target, and the Home Secretary's office has merely played the role of conduit to it. You implied something similar to Farnsworth. He said he left you in a pitiful state and under the care of your physician." Stanley looked at me. "The only pitiful state that will occur is the one to your office should you not take my advice. It will take up your time, and I would insist that you work with me and keep close to your chest what I have to share with you," Holmes said to him. "Well, I see you are very weary, Mr. Holmes, but you seem quite sane. Still, the man you speak of, Baron Maupertuis, who my man did report to me an hour ago you have persecuted, has presented himself to the Home Office as being the most courteous and sound gentleman. He has nearly completed his studies here and will soon launch his business, which, if I understand it correctly, is a communications company, from the Netherlands to the heart of Indonesia's commercial centre. In doing so, he will be proclaimed the hero of his people for the financial protection of their interests he will bring to them in that part of the world, and in aiding the Dutch war effort against a native uprising there in Asia. He is a swindler and has no such company. Whatever shares he has sold have behind them no infrastructure, no plan to employ hundreds or thousands of workers, no cable to lay on the ocean's floors, no equipment purchased to send messages from The Hague to Sumatra. What he has done is played everyone in government for tomfools." Holmes laughed, and then he coughed and crumbled into one of his host's chairs. "Mr. Holmes is not well, my lord," I said. Lord Stanley looked at Holmes, who was the picture of exhaustion. Mr. Holmes, I. And there Stanley stopped in his speech. He was debating something in his mind, and there was no prodding him at this point. Regardless of it being Sherlock Holmes, the Earl himself had to come to conclude that whatever it was that had to be done, only the President of the Trade Board could make the determination. "Very well, Mr. Holmes, our charter was not designed to cover this contingency. I see you have a great worry over the security of the telegraphy department, so I will take you to it, and you can see these rooms for yourself." "No, sir. I need you to furnish me with a trusted telegrapher and an electric engineer who will keep quiet," said Holmes. "Very well, I do not understand your fear, Mr. Holmes, but there can be no harm in what you've asked for. There is one and only one thing for the Baron to do." Holmes had become excited. Oh, what a coup! What an amazing man! He has taken a primitive concept and exploited it to levels unimaginable. But to work his final stage, he must use materials, not merely eavesdrop on the spoken plans of others. This has been his modus operandi, the spying out of people doing and saying casual things, which can be exploited for theft by entry into areas where security is lax. What is the nature of the telegraphy system? There is a new key system we installed, developed by Emile Baudot. It is an amazing improvement from our previous keyboard. I met Baudot. He gave many on our board a demonstration of his newly perfected devices, and the Baron was there as we worked on them, and we did show him how they were used. "And how many key operators of these devices are in your rooms?" asked Holmes. "For our domestic line, that room indeed increases with the business day to 20. It lessens with night time to 8. International traffic is also gauged to use our employee staff efficiently, but there is always traffic, so that number is at least a dozen at all times, sometimes 16. "And the wires for these machines?" Holmes asked. "What about them?" the Earl asked in a serious tone. "They certainly do not go out of the building, one set per machine?" Holmes asked. "Well, certainly they do, Mr. Holmes. The wires at the point of each machine are individual, then feed into a cable which holds them all, and that cable is what leaves the building." "I see. At what location is the point where the cable runs from the building before becoming submarined below the waters?" "That I can show you, Mr. Holmes." "You, my lord?" "Most definitely. I will be party to your game," Lord Stanley answered. The Earl had his own carriage, and we used it to ride to this building Holmes had already, through his own investigations, understood to be the telegraphy department of the Board of Trade. Beside Lord Stanley, Holmes and myself, there was a telegrapher, and behind us, following in a cart, was a driver with a Baudot machine. Baron Maupertuis has been employing a group of rogues to penetrate into any building, find a means to spy on those inside, learn a secret involving something valuable, and then stealing whatever this thing may be. It's primitive and so basic that one does not ever think of it, as if a magician had an assistant beneath his stand who, under the cover of a silk scarf, removed certain items and replaced them with others. One looks for elegance and refinement, while the simplest way to bring about a feat is unexpected. The Baron succeeded in learning of your telegraphy department's wire locations, and has made a method to spy on them," Holmes concluded. "How so?" asked the Earl. "He has his own set of wires that run from yours before they join the collective cable that your board has arranged to be laid into the Thames, and from there to the world beyond. That is, one of his men has merely run piggybacked wires attached to and away from wherever your collective cable begins. The Baron does not interfere with your receptions or transmissions, but instead eavesdrops in an electrical manner. While the rich get richer through their private efforts, the unscrupulous Baron is using this private information to similar purposes. Orders from men of capital, government signals, anything you like. The Baron reads it and exploits it. He is getting rich off of this electronic spying he set up when he was pretending to observe your processes for his non-existent company. I cannot say how he did this, as I do not know the telegraphic room's layout, but I can promise you his gang is made up of men who are experts at being where they are not supposed to be. Did he leave a man or two to work in your department, let us say, overnight? And did they work surreptitiously to make these wire connections and run them to a place where he could read your traffic? That, at least, would be the Baron's demonstrated way of operating. How do you know this, Mr. Holmes? In fact, I do not know it. But what I do know is your telegraphers work at a nondescript, unmarked building at Grosvenor Road, which for all purposes is the Thames. You are correct, Mr. Holmes. It is when you asked of this building some weeks ago that my officers became interested in your investigation. At the Telegraphy's engineer's office on Chelsea Bridge Road, Lord Stanley pulled aside a man named Groden. Holmes explained to him his theory. "For this to be real," said Groden, "there has to be visible wires running from the telegraphy room to outside of the building." "How well do you know the building?" Holmes asked the gentleman. "I live it, Mr. Holmes," replied Groden. The telegrapher waited at the carriage with the man whose cart held the machine, while the four of us went to the building and walked its perimeter. As we rounded the side of the building that faced the river, we were especially on the lookout for the strange. "There," exclaimed Groden, "that shouldn't be there." There was no disguising it. Thick wires, bundled together, hung down from a window of the telegraphy building and ran off toward the edge of the Thames, which featured at this light industrial community a thick raised hardscape. We looked at one another and to the wires somewhere around the water's edge, and in my imagination I saw them hug the cement at a point where they would be just out of sight, laid along at that point where they would be near the waterline. How protected they would have to be I could not say, but the wires had to have some exterior covering for the brief journey from the window to their destination. "That's the place, or I'm fixed," said Holmes, pointing to a bakery between the hardscape at the edge of the Thames and West Road, just beyond the Ranelagh Gardens. "And they are clever for using that place. A baker's hours would be perfect to trespass on the premises at night time." "Yes, Mr. Holmes, that all makes sense. If I had to guess, I would say the wires lead some 300 feet from our building to that one, and all of it laid just below the waterline. It must re-emerge somewhere around the bakery, just as you say," agreed Groden. "They will not be here yet and will use the cover of night to achieve their ends," Holmes said. "We must take their cables and piggyback on them, just as they have done to your legitimate ones. And we must find another room in that building where we may set up shop." "And," said the Earl, "we must do so in a room beyond what we perceive to be theirs, so they will fail to see our hookup, as they would most probably take this same road we are using down this way to get to their place of operation." "Exactly," said Holmes. With the assistance of the telegrapher, Groden worked to create this piggyback and run a new set of wires to our keyboard machine. Lord Stanley guessed we were in a small office allocated for the delivery portion of the bakery's business. While we waited for Groden to complete his work, Holmes took time to pen a lengthy letter, and he asked Lord Stanley to entrust it to Groden to take it to Scotland Yard. Once his work was completed, before the cover of night fell, Groden returned with Tobias Gregson, who had with him 4 men. He placed one of these men strategically near the other side of the building to spy out a series of rooms where we all believed one of them had to be the Baron's lair. We watched as Groden and the keyboard operator tested the current as power flowed from the built-in batteries powering the machine and through to the attached wires. "Mr. Holmes," said Gregson, "I understand you are organising the efforts for a major arrest, and that will be possible once this Baron and his men are in place. Their trespass onto this property will warrant our investigation. By that I mean myself and the constables here, and should we discover this telegraphy device, and his lordship attests to this on the spot, regardless of the importance of the person of the Baron, at that moment he would be fair game as if he were any other common criminal." "True," Holmes said. His ailment of fatigue was obvious to us all, and he was weary as he spoke to Gregson. "But first we're going to have a bit of fun with the Baron." Holmes, in his tired and ill state, looked at the telegraphic message boards and smiled. "Baron Maupertuis has the Board of Trade's wires, and we have his. We will make it a night he will not soon forget. The Baron is working to dupe Great Britain, and his hatred for our country knows no bounds. You do not know this man as I know him. We are going to make certain he learns our strength and what we are capable of doing to those who threaten our infrastructures." "Oh my, Mr. Holmes." Stanley looked at the key panel and then back at my friend. "You are the devil himself. Should Farnsworth ever leave my employ, know you have a position on that day." Later that night, Baron Falhas Maupertuis, along with whom I later learned to be Daniel Boston, and James Jimmy Sims Hillard, the only man among them with a police record in Amsterdam, quietly walked to the office they had exploited overnight for some time. This was reported to us by Constable Allen, who had watched them from around the corner of the building before rejoining us. "These wires are now the Baron's traffic," said Groden. "He will not know it, but after you change this switch from upper to lower, and make certain the switch clasps into this fitting," Groden pointed to a large levelled toggle, "he will receive only what we send to him." "Lord Stanley, you do not disappoint," Holmes said to him in reverence. "By now," Holmes said to us some 20 minutes later, "Baron Maupertuis should be in the thick of his electronic theft." All nodded, an understanding of Holmes's reasoning. Sherlock Holmes embraced us all. "Let us begin," he said, lifting and lowering the master switch Grodin had added to the telegraphy board. "Please send this," Holmes said to the telegrapher, a man named Ernest Morden. "Lord Caves advises the purchase of all radishes in Wales." Lord Stanley burst out with laughter. Laughter was followed by others, including Gregson, who attempted to remain professional. Holmes waited a full minute before his next transmission. We could imagine the absurd reaction our adversaries must have had to the ridiculous signal they had received. Then 1 minute later, correction re Radish advisory. Message should read, Lord Radish advises the purchase of all whales found in caves. Morden himself nearly slipped the hand of his operation as he reacted to Holmes's fun and games at the presumed expense of the Baron and friends. The rest of us were enjoying a moment of humour, and eventually no one in the room was ashamed to show it. Then 1 minute later, correction re Wales advisory. Message should read, Lord Walesby advises the purchase of all coffee found in Sumatra. Then only 10 seconds afterward, correction re coffee advisory. Message should read, there once was a Baron named Maupertuis, whose brain was no bigger than fleas. He challenged Great Britain, but found himself bitten, and now is discovered he's on the high seas. For a moment, I too believed Sherlock Holmes to be mad with malady. Lord Stanley merely shook his head in disbelief. "That will do it," cried Gregson to his men, and out he led them to make their arrest. Lord Stanley left, saying to us he would make an international announcement, using the genuine telegraphy equipment in the Board of Trade's building, that all traffic and purchases involving Baron Maupertuis are to be suspended entirely. In fact, he did more. Some minutes later, Morden, who received the message on his key station, read to us, Baron Valhaas Maupertuis, Netherland, Sumatra Company is a sham. It is a financial swindle, instituted by the Baron from these isles. All of his holdings are to be confiscated, and any profits and property of the Baron are to be seized at once. His plot was uncovered by Mr. Sherlock Holmes of the United Kingdom. Any assistance to the Baron, given by subjects of Great Britain, from this point forward is to be ended. Any such assistance shall be seen by Her Majesty's government as treason. All assistance to the Baron by persons subject to another jurisdiction shall be seen as an unfriendly act toward Great Britain. I left after Morden's report of this message and made my way to where I presumed Gregson and his men would be. I turned to see whether Holmes would follow me, but he was gone. I made my way to the area where we knew the Baron had set up his telegraph, but on my way I heard a deafening explosion, and I arrived to find Gregson and his men at collective calamity. The Baron and his men were not anywhere to be seen. The following day, all of London was in an uproar. Never in my wildest imagination could I have thought yesterday evening's event would become the press sensation of the year, and that Sherlock Holmes would become an international celebrity, his name known in every home throughout Europe. His lodgings were mobbed by reporters and government representatives alike. Mrs. Hudson was interviewed, as was any boy who during the last year gave Holmes's shoes a shine. My residence and practice were passed by countless people who, when they spotted my wife or myself, tipped their hats in the kindest fashion. During the next 2 days, no less than 70 letters came to me from persons asking whether I would consider being their doctor. Officials came to visit me, asking for the whereabouts of my friend. The morning newspapers had only the one story to run of Lord Stanley's world communication, and the ensuing financial reaction that had happened between 8 p.m. and midnight, when the dailies had to go to press. It was the evening editions which ran the full story, after Tobias Gregson had given a meeting specifically for members of the respectable press, which resulted in a full account of the Baron's activities made available to the public. Due to the unique nature of how Lord Stanley had phrased his alert, every person turned all praise to Sherlock Holmes, who it was fully understood had singly defeated one of the most cunning charlatans of the century. It was not until the 3rd day after the escape of Baron Maupertuis and the disappearance of Sherlock Holmes that a story heralding the conclusion of the affair was featured in the Times. On the right of its front page, no less. The headline read, Maupertuis surrenders. One of his co-conspirators dead, another severely wounded. Mr. Sherlock Holmes, alive and recovering in France. Baron Falhas. Maupertuis eludes the authorities of Britain, the Netherlands and Belgium, only to be brought to justice by Mr. Holmes. Dramatic train adventure. Witnesses' lives in jeopardy. Holmes to their rescue. The featured story read, Monsieur Jacques Renou, Lieutenant, France, of the 4th arrondissement of the city Lyon in France, reports the safety of Mr. Sherlock Holmes of the United Kingdom. The police under his authority have removed Mr. Holmes to an undisclosed location for convalescence, due to what the lieutenant described as shock to his body and physical exhaustion. Mr. Holmes had been in pursuit of Baron Falhas Maupertuis, 11th Baron, Deventer in the Netherlands, for 3 days and nights, after the Baron escaped from our home soil to flee to Rotterdam and then into Antwerp, and after crossing the frontier into northeastern France by way of Charleville-Mézières and Reims. Baron Maupertuis had escaped England just as authorities were about to take him into custody. As reported in previous accounts, the Baron and his companions, believed to be co-conspirators, in a great plot involving a fictitious enterprise the Baron had used as a pretense for purposes of entering our country, were able to escape the forces of the Metropolitan Police by means of a smoke-exploding device, its basis being of potassium chlorate. The use of this bomb interfered with the swift apprehension attempted by constables under the direction of Inspector Tobias Gregson. The police officials were not injured in the altercation, but the Baron and his servants escaped. The police forces in Amsterdam, where the Baron has his ancestral home, were unable to apprehend him during his time there of less than a day, and it is speculated he had many choices of residence during a 24-hour period before he left his native land and was thought to make arrangements to travel to the East Indies by way of Amsterdam. But reports surfaced that Mr. Holmes was in Brussels, urging police forces there to concentrate their efforts on the southern borders of Belgium, and though there was some coordination of resources along these lines, the majority of the Belgian forces moved to Ghent, where it was thought the Baron was preparing to move to the coast for the aforementioned sea travel and gambit on Asia to be the best place to find shelter. The Baron indeed fled south to France, where the intrepid private inquiry agent followed him and boarded the train, pulling 3 passenger carriages and the Baron's private one, which he had leased as a supposed venture for a commercial enterprise dealing in wines and certain foodstuffs. This was a ploy discovered by Mr. Holmes, and a confrontation between he, the Baron, and his men moved from the private car and into a passenger one, or more than one, with the passengers in danger of life and limb, made so by the threats of the Baron and his men. The reports of witnesses vary, but only to a nominal degree. It is substantiated by all accounts that Mr. Holmes grappled with one James Hillard, the latter having a revolver, who had at one point used it to make demands of the passengers in one of the carriages. It is reported Mr. Holmes worked the weapon from the hand of Mr. Hillard, and afterward this was collected by a passenger, a British ophthalmologist, travelling with his wife. Mr. Hillard came at the doctor and his wife in an attempt to overpower him, and the man shot the unfortunate Mr. Hillard, who succumbed to injuries later that day. With the gun no longer an issue to the scuffle, Mr. Holmes attempted to defuse tension, and at that moment, another man in the Baron's employ named Danny came at Mr. Holmes, and together they fell from the metal platform outside of the carriage at the point of the couplers. How it is reported by the French police that Mr. Holmes is recovering only from shock is a mystery, and though the person identified as Danny was found near the rail lines with serious injury, such was not the case for Mr. Holmes, who is resting in Lyons, as stated by Lieutenant Renou. The Baron, after losing his second co-conspirator and being held at bay by the passengers, gave up to the police at Dijon. There were many more news reports, and I could include in this account dozens for the benefit of the reader, but most important was a telegram I received from Holmes, pleading that I waste no time in coming to see him at the Hotel Dulong, where he was recuperating. When I arrived, there was a 2-hour wait before the French police made me available to my friend. After getting approval from the very same lieutenant mentioned in the story from the Times, I had to present myself twice to uniformed men, once on the first floor of the hotel, and then at the door of Holmes's room. I entered and learned the hotel room had been turned into a patient's room and found Holmes in bed and barely able to move. As I walked to his bed, I found at my feet thousands of telegrams. Thousands. I picked one up and could not understand it, as it was in the German language, another several in French, finally one in the King's English. It was a congratulatory note, thanking Holmes for his intervention and saving the integrity of the telecommunication system as it applied to the New York Stock Exchange. There was another in English of a similar nature thanking him for his service. It was from a pig iron manufacturer in the United States, Andrew Carnegie. Another from the chairman of Pratt's. It went on and on and on. Potentates of Asia, African investors in gold, average shareholders in Prussia, royalty in Russia and Poland, a widow in Kent. All of these with the same message about his protection of communication and what it meant to the leaders of institutions, or as the humblest of persons. I was beside myself in admiration for Holmes on the one hand, and concern over the cost to his body and spirit on the other. Before me was a Sherlock Holmes whose mind had gone to the blackest corners. No, 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 Watson. No, these men. These foolish men. What to do? One came at the couple on the train, and the husband had to shoot him. I was too slow in his capture, and he threatened the woman, one of our subjects, a good man, a medical man like yourself, and this other, and the Baron. His hatred of our people is very harsh. He has been plotting against us, and was involved in 3 projects, one designed to harm our people in South Africa. That plan of his goes on. This other man's body I was forced to use as a shield against the rocks below the rail line. That was not my purpose. Only misfortune for he and good luck for me made this so. Oh, Watson, you have a wife. She will look to your needs. What are my prospects when I come to the Baron's age? The same. The same. The angel confronting me after this lifetime will judge me harshly, I feel. Watson, you are good to come. Holmes was in a deep misery the likes of which I had never seen him display. This was a dark depression, and I knew the signs. I also knew he would recover. I had seen far worse cases in wartime. Holmes's sorrows were based on his own standard and belief that he should be able to achieve and win roses at every point in the game. Tough stuff. Here also he paid the price for racking his body to the limits of 3 men. Like all of the Western world, I too was proud of his accomplishment, but watching it in action and seeing the deterioration of his body and tough mental powers was not easy, and it lifted my spirits being by his side at this moment. So, Daniel Boston fell below you and saved your body from the impact. Yes, Watson, that was the case. He will live, or so says Lieutenant Renout, I said. I have heard also. The administrative policeman outside the door keeps me informed. Holmes, what became of you a few nights ago at the bakery? I wasn't prepared for you to vanish like that. Where did you go? For that matter, what did Baron Maupertuis do after he and his men escaped Gregson? I asked. He ran from the scene with his men. I had no idea of the smoke device. Ingenious. I knew he would go back to his lair. I beat him there and took the Artemis painting. He arrived and saw me and drove on. I bungled that. It stretched matters out these several days, and my bungling placed the lives of all of those on the carriage in danger. I thought of Ducani and the painting, and my own success, and failed to lay a trap for the Baron, the worst decision of my career. A stray bullet would have killed an innocent person on that train. Oh, Watson. My way of doing things, it has its price. And the Baron now? The Baron is now in protective custody. The French are loath to give him up, I can tell, and they are using him as a bargaining chip to get some concession from our government. No doubt they'll put Lonsdale and Farnsworth on point, and the two will suggest it's all a misunderstanding, and that the Baron be granted an honorary knighthood. I think, Holmes, that the Baron will be given up by the French, perhaps for a quiet trade of some kind as you suggest, and then he will stay a good deal in our custody. Holmes heard these words, shook his head and said, I am a bungler. Then with his eyes nearly closed he shouted, The adder! After this he shivered in his bed, then he calmed himself, then he fell asleep. When we returned to London 3 days later, Holmes was in better spirits. He completed his recovery in the armchair of his sitting room. There is good medicine in the familiar. He wrote to Professor Ducani that he would see him in a few days' time, and also arranged for Lord Stanley to have a letter of commendation written on the Professor's behalf. Though the crime may have harmed the professor professionally, the letter told of how Ducani's actions resulted in the discovery of the recent plot against the Board of Trade. The letter stated, mainly to impress James Whistler, that what happened afterward safeguarded the integrity of the country's communication system, and had he, Ducani, not have contacted Mr. Holmes for assistance, an alternate, catastrophic circumstance may have occurred. This more than mollified the nervous academic. During those few days before visiting the professor in his lecture hall and returning the painting to him, Holmes placed it over the mantel and occasionally enjoyed it. Mrs. Hudson saw it and was up in arms. "This is a good Christian home, made by a good Scotswoman's presence, Mr. Holmes, and we will tolerate none of your pagan goddesses who can't seem to find where they misplace their shifts. And I don't care what any professor says about this woman and her prancing in her swimming pool. And I don't care if she can turn people into elk, or moose, or American buffalo. I'm not afraid of her, and she can live on the floor in the corner facing the wall. You do not appreciate the female form, Mrs. Hudson." Holmes's humour was apparent. "I'll give your goddess the form of the rubbish heap on Thursday next," she replied. "Pagans, beware," said Holmes, gleeful at this overreaction displayed by the good and Christian Scots landlady. His spirits were lifted. The Baron spent some time in Britain, 8 years before he was turned over to the Dutch. There he was imprisoned, but after some time it was privately shared with us how the Baron was working on one of the projects some years previous to which Holmes had alluded, some action in South Africa that meant harm to our interests there. This plot bore no fruit and quite possibly backfired, and may have contributed to the British Army's actions there and the eventual and recent Peace of Vereeniging. At any score, the Baron soon afterward had a stroke and was moved to a room in his ancestral home. The Baron's nephew, who will one day become the 12th Baron of the name of his province, has since written to Holmes. He and Holmes have a correspondence. He has busied himself with the administrative and welfare matters concerning those on his estate. "That's the job for a nobleman," Holmes once said while we discussed the future Baron's eventual title. "It is the very marrow of the idea of being noble that one's fellow creatures can turn to those in a higher station for support and find it, and the nobleman finds his loyalty well deserved." Postscript. Part of the fun in preparing the 5 adventures Dr. Watson alludes to in the opening paragraphs of The 5 Orange Pips was the choosing of setting them in specific times during 1887. In the case of my first story, The Adventure of the Paradol Chamber, I chose January because this allowed me to use those days. The Savoy Opera had its difficulties with the initial performances of Ruddigore, or alternately titled The Witch's Curse. The hotel construction next door to the theatre was ongoing during this time, and that setting seemed a good place for the detective aspect of the story. This story was different, because I decided to make my amateur mendicant society story a Baron Maupertuis one. I was governed by the entire second paragraph of The Reigate Squires in determining when the story occurred. Watson receives a telegram on April 14th from Lyon, France, where Holmes is convalescing at the Hotel Dulong and suffering the deepest misery. Holmes had to have worked the case for over a 2-month period previous to the telegram's date, and this means any writer's Baron Maupertuis story must occur from mid-February to mid-April, 1887. Given all there was to work with, dating the events of this story came naturally to me as it would any writer of a Baron Maupertuis story. The climax, not so much. Doyle's words in Reigate are, the triumphant issue of his, referring to Holmes, labours could not save him from reaction after so terrible an exertion, and at a time when Europe was ringing with his name, and when his room was literally ankle-deep with congratulatory telegrams, I found him a prey to the blackest depression. Oh, Doyle, 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 what are we going to do about this matter of the congratulatory telegrams? Shelby Foote, the American Civil War author, liked to tell a story of a senator from Alabama, who at the outset of the war thought it so insignificant, and that there would be no real bloodshed, that whatever blood was spilt, he offered to clean up with his handkerchief. Foote maintained someone could get a PhD if he or she could figure out how many handkerchiefs it would take to clean up all the blood spilt during the American Civil War. Research students Mark Fonstad, William Pugach, and Brandon Vogt once published their data and proofs which showed Kansas is in fact flatter than a pancake. Shall we all in our imaginations visit this hotel in Lyons, determine the area size of its floor, and estimate how many relatively thin telegrams would be needed to make Watson's assertion hell, express statement, accurate, that the pile of them was high enough to be ankle deep? By the statements made by Doyle in Reigate, it is very clear Holmes achieved one of his greatest professional successes, as well as a reaction from all of Europe, filled with such astounding praise that this was Sherlock Holmes' greatest moment of his career. Though the phrases are brief, they are conclusive in that any writer's version of Baron Maupertuis and the Netherlands Sumatra Company must have an ending that brings down the house. I am loath to render such. My world view is a story told with a joyful achievement that means a deep something, rather than an epic hoopla where thousands cheer, but somehow rings hollow in the hearts of the reader. Trapped by the words of my benefactor, once more into the bard, I am in blood, stepped in so far that I'm in a good mood. Amy has baked her sour cream pound cake this evening, making it for me in the nude. She, not me. Sandor Jay Sonnen, Palos Verdes, California.